Okay, so can we start by understanding what employee engagement really means?
Sure. So it's an organizational approach to creating an environment and conditions within a workplace where employees can thrive. You want to create a situation where people are motivated, committed to the company vision, and that they feel that they're a valuable part of the culture. And that's really what the engagement process is about. Ultimately, when you create an environment where they're all in, then they're productive. But you really have to start from the standpoint too of really understanding that it's not just the physical environment. It's sort of an environment on the periphery as well. It's not just what are your surroundings with. That's part of it, and it can be part of it. But it really has to do with the atmosphere and the culture that you define. But if you have to sum it up, it's an environment where they feel really invested, they feel really motivated, and like I said, they're really buying in and contributing to that corporate culture and that corporate vision.
Okay. So we hear about companies like Google and Facebook. They spend a lot of money on food courts and game rooms, quiet spaces, things like that. Do you think it's really worth the expense?
Well, yeah, listen, they get it, right? I mean, they know through experience and certainly through a lot of research that happy employees equal higher profits. So people that are happier, that are more satisfied, more fulfilled, look forward to coming to work, are in the end more productive, more creative. They're better client facing, they're better with clients, right? So from the perspective of a large company, they don't look at it as an expense like a Google, a Facebook, a Wegmans. They look at it as a way to ensure that they remain on top. So from their perspective, they know that they're dealing in human capital, right? That's their people. They're not looking to make a better widget per se, they're looking for creativity. I mean, yes, they have a product or products, but they're looking for creativity. So they really need to keep their people motivated and satisfied. So from there, again, from their perspective, it's higher profit. So it's so worth the expense. But it's a little different sometimes with smaller and mid-sized businesses.
Yeah, so isn't there something to be said for just a head down and get your work done approach?
Well, sure, yeah. Here's the thing with that. There was a study done back in the 1800s. I think it was by a guy named Frederick Taylor. And he did a study where he took a very scientific approach to analyzing manufacturing jobs. Right? What does the assembly line, remember that time is the Industrial Revolution, right? So he looked at it from the perspective of how do we streamline that assembly line? How do we get employees the most productive to produce the greatest amounts? And really what it came down to is that exact thing that you described. It's that head down approach, right? It's work from this hour to this hour. You go through this process to that process. They're repetitive tasks, but with those types of tasks, they require a little creativity. Right? There's little room for thought and ingenuity. It's assembly line, so it's a defined process. But to a large degree now, we've transitioned away from that. We are no longer in that assembly line, manufacturing type of society. Sure, we have that industry, but the majority of what we deal with now is a knowledge-based society, right? So it requires a different approach. And when we're looking at a knowledge-based industry, if you will, any type of industry, the industry here, accounting firm, an entrepreneur's accounting firm, it's knowledge-based, right? We need to tap into intellect. We need to tap into intellect, creativity, and passion. And we need to focus on developing the person, not the process, okay? Because it's the person that's delivering, and it's not the process that they're going through to deliver a product, it's what their human capital, what their mind is producing, their creativity is producing. So at its core, it really is the difference between managing and leading, right? When we manage somebody, we're telling them, hey, this is the process that you have to go through to accomplish the job. It's one of the things that I deal with leaders a lot, especially new leaders, emerging leaders, young ones in particular. They'll go through and say, but I do this, I know how to do it, so I just want to tell them how to do that. That's the worst approach in that kind of knowledge-based economy. You want to give them some autonomy, but in this way, you really need to lead a person and not manage them. So we need to spend more time in creating the person and developing the person and bringing that person up than we do the process.
Okay. But what about small and mid-sized companies? I mean, this sounds like it could be expensive.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, you're not taking the Google approach where we're going to put a cafeteria with 4 different options for restaurants, right? They have, I think they call it the Google campus now. But when we talk about an environment that fosters engagement from a small to mid-sized perspective, we have to look at it and say that it's a new mindset. Again, it's not just that physical environment. There are cultural aspects, but while we're on it, let's talk for a second about that physical aspect, because there are, even in a small office, 20-person, 30-person office, there are ways to do it. There are ways, cost-effective ways, to change the physical environment without investing in a basketball court, without investing in an entire weight room or a game room or all these other things. We have to design the environment to fit the job. So is it concentration or collaboration? And this is what I mean. Some jobs, even in knowledge-based economies or knowledge-based professions, they have a head-down approach, right? You need to be head in the books. I would submit that probably in some aspects of what gets done here, particularly in tax season, it's a head-down approach. Distraction-free, have to be disciplined and focused. You're dealing with people's taxes. It's a very defined science. In addition to that, though, what you guys do here, this is a great example, is you do a lot of counseling, a lot of advising, a lot of entrepreneur business advice. So when you do that, there should be more of a collaborative environment. So there should be room here, right, and in most offices, for that person that has that focused position, that disciplined job, to have the space they need. Even if it's a few rooms, like, okay, we have the quiet areas, the rooms where people can go in, they can get their laptop, they can focus, they can be free from distractions, no phones, whatever they need. But in other environments, take a look at like software manufacturing, take a look at a Google where you have several developers working on a project simultaneously. They may need to literally pick their head up, look at another developer and say, hey, I'm trying to get this piece of code to do this. Have you done that before? Not have to get up, go to his office, come back, where he can flip his laptop and then say to him, this is what I'm working on. So you can design workspace around that. You want to have it so it's like sort of open, right, and in close proximity and not restricted. The other lesson that we can sort of take, or the other thing that we can take is to look at, believe it or not, evolution or vacation, right? A great deal of research suggests that part of the reason that people feel energized when they get back from vacation is not just because they weren't at work, but it was because of the environment that they're in, right? They were outside more, they had more pleasant viewing scenes, they just saw a better environment, they breathed natural air. So in designing workspace, what can we do to do that that's cost effective? Well, we can design it in such a way that we're utilizing as much natural lighting as we have. We can face our people towards the windows, as opposed to facing them all inward, like in sort of a pit bull sort of pit scenario, right? You could even do things like with aquariums or artwork, things that sort of replicate nature and give people a sense that they're outdoors. There's a lot of research to suggest that that's very valuable in making people feel energized, creative, and relaxed. And of course, one of the other things you want to consider is allow people to get out, allow people to take a walk, get some fresh air. Those are kind of things you can do with not a Google budget, not a Facebook budget, but a budget that allows you to just create and simulate that environment for your people.
That's good. And what would you say to managers or supervisors who push back and say allowing them this downtime takes away from their work? We're paying them for 8 hours.
Right. So I would say adapt or die. And I know it's hard. I mean, what job are we asking them to do? Is it a repetitive assembly line type of job? If that's the case, then yeah, we need to defined hours and with defined breaks in a rigid schedule structure. But chances are, most of the leaders today have a different type of employee, right? They're leading somebody different. They're in what I described before, that knowledge-based economy. And this begs the question, do we want somebody that sticks to a solid 8-hour schedule, takes their standard half hour for lunch, but is 50% productive? Or do we want to afford them the flexibility to maybe come in at 10 or maybe come in at 7 because they're very productive in the morning and we get 90% out of them, right? The research doesn't lie. Think about the last time that you were stuck intellectually, you were stuck creatively, or perhaps you had to write something. Let's say for argument's sake, you had to write copy for an ad, or you had to write a memo that was extremely important, or a report, something that had to really be correct, and you got what a lot of people experience, and that's writer's block. Or you, like I said, you were just working on something intellectually, to put your head down and focus that, right? And we say to our employees, you gotta be at your desk, 7.5 hours, half hour for lunch. Put your head down and try to focus on that problem. And will a solution is not going to happen. Basically, most people solve problems when they get up and remove themselves from it. So if you were to get up and take a walk, go play a game, go do something like that, your mind is working on it in the background. And your solutions will pop. I know this happens for me all the time. I mean, I do a tremendous amount of writing, and one of the things that will happen is when I feel like I'm pressured under a deadline, I feel stuck. And I know I have to be disciplined to get up and move. So we have to remove ourselves from the mentality of, it's an 8-hour day, they have to be here from this time. I deal with a lot of employers who I coach and counsel, who I have to try to break them of this. They'll complain to me that their employees want to work from home more and that type of thing, and I have to say, listen, it's a new era, and it's not because it's a type of employee, it's a type of industry.
Okay. And you talked about playing a game, and we spoke about game rooms in the very beginning, but is this really a viable option for a workplace?
Yeah, it is. And I know it runs contrary to what a lot of people feel, but it absolutely is. I'm not saying the entire workday has to be like, I don't know if you remember the series The Office, where they spent more time playing and more times in ridiculous meetings than they did for anything else. But there is a place for this. Take for example what most of us go through, that after lunch afternoon crash, right? By 2 p.m. we're all sort of feeling lethargic.
Coffee time.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's what we're doing, and we're pumping ourselves full of coffee, but it doesn't always work. But imagine for a second if after lunch you could take a 20-minute walk or a half an hour walk, or if after lunch you could play a game. Let me give you an example. So I'll give you 2 examples, and maybe we'll have a chance to elaborate on this a little further in a minute, but the first example was for a company called Vonage. Vonage does voice over IP, among other communications, and very successful company. And I've had an opportunity to be in their home Dell office. And I've been there on several occasions, and I noticed that most of the time that I was there, I was doing workshops, and I was wrapping up at 1 o'clock. And one of the things that I noticed is that the same group of people would come in and play ping pong around 1 o'clock. And they would have a ping pong game, and it lasted typically 20 to 25 minutes. They would do, it seemed like they were like sort of doing a tournament style, right? And winner, and then I probably progressed. And I thought, and at first it kind of took me up short. I'm like, oh, wow, what a great place to work, right? You get to play games. Then I thought, well, after lunch, if you got energized, competitive, you could certainly be more productive after lunch. You wouldn't necessarily hit that lull, hit that lag. The other example I'll give you is a company that I had the good fortune of working for called Upside Travel, a bunch of software developers. And I'll never forget this. I took a lunch break there. I was there doing some consulting work, and I got back from lunch, and truth be told, I probably had 15 to 16 years on everybody when I walked in that room. Everybody was extremely young, exactly. And as I sat down to the area that I was assigned to work in that day, or I was meeting with one of their people, I got hit in the back with a Nerf bullet. They had Nerf guns. Well, what they didn't realize is that I had previously come from law enforcement. So my marksmanship skills were as such that I was a competitor. So I had noticed all around the office there are Nerf guns with buckets of ammunition. So after lunch, this fight broke out. And before you know it, there were ad hoc teams, and I was involved. I gotta tell you, I didn't get a lag that day. I mean, it lasted about 15 minutes. It was a lot of laughs. I got childlike. I was literally ducking and rolling, SWAT moves.
Really playing.
And I really had a good time with it. But afterwards, I was up. And I never hit that lag. And I am a typical after lunch coffee guy. And I don't even think I had coffee that day. So I think there is a place for it. It can't dominate, of course, but I think there's a place for it.
Okay. And what would you say to your older leaders, such as yourself,
Yes, exactly.
who came from a different time and are having difficulty adapting?
I could probably say this very succinctly, and I'll go back to what I said a second ago, is adapt or die. And the reason I say that is, look, I came from, and you know this, I came from one of the toughest industries, law enforcement. And when I talk to my brothers and sisters that have retired from law enforcement and now are in the private sector, we talk a lot about how difficult it was for them to transition their leadership skills and how difficult it was to transition their communication skills. Because in law enforcement, it was an attitude of, you don't like it? Leave. Right? We were contract employees, and you want to talk about a rigid schedule, and you want to talk about beholden to your employer. If your replacement didn't come in, you worked an extra 4 hours, getting called in on weekends and holidays. I came from that industry, and I was able to make this transition. I was able to look at this problem or look at this perspective of an employee engagement environment and adapt. So when I coach people in this, and I've had many, many business leaders from the small firms to very large firms, accountants, architects, firms across the board who are my age or older. I call it the gray hair club, right? that are my age or older, and they say, I can't get my mind around this. And I'll say to them two things. First, look at the research, and I'll show them. There's a ton of research to suggest this works. At the end of the day, do you want to be rich or do you want to be right? Do you want to be successful or do you want to show that you're right? Because I imagine in the end, you're not going to be right. And then by proxy, you won't be successful. So I typically end it by saying, take a leap of faith. Try it. There's nothing ventured, nothing gained. So you really have nothing to lose to try this perspective, and I guarantee it'll pay dividends.
All right, and how far should we take it? And what about working from home?
Yeah, I mean, I think this can absolutely be a viable option, right? I think, a lot of people are apprehensive about working from home, and it's one of the chief complaints I get. They feel like, well, if not in here, they're goofing off. But if you go back to the research, there's a great deal of research to show that working from home employees, when they work from home, they can be on their own rhythm. You know inherently, Karen, when you're most productive during the day, right? You know when you're not. So you probably at this point in your career say, well, I have these tasks before me. I have to do this in the morning, and I can leave this for the afternoon because it requires less brain power or whatever it is. Some people are the reverse of that, right? Some people are, I'm not a morning person, I can't get going. After lunch, I'm ready to rock. And that's okay. When they're able to work from home, they're able to match their work to their most productive times. In addition to that, if I gave you the availability, let's say for argument's sake, taking that 20-minute walk wasn't your thing, playing ping pong wasn't your thing, but you said to me, Drew, I need a 10-minute power nap. If I get a 10-minute power nap, I'm good the rest of the day. You got me till 6:30. At home, they can do it. It's 10 minutes. Boom, they can do it, it's 10 minutes. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. Of course, the job has to be right for it, right? And there's also ways in which you can combine it. You can say, and you don't have to do it like we say, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're here, Thursday, Friday. You can say, let's design the weeks. Okay, guys, this is what we're gonna do this week. We're gonna make sure that we're all in the office on these days. You guys can work from home this day. This way when people have to be in the office, if you feel that you have to have that team collaboration approach. If not, then people working remotely will probably serve you fine. In the end, my perspective is, focus on productivity and success. Don't focus on rigid work schedules. That's the way to succeed.
Okay, and what other advice would you give to executives, supervisors, and leaders to help create an environment of employee engagement, and particularly where budgets are kind of low?
Wow, there are so many. Let me try to focus on two. The first thing I would say is create an environment where there's autonomy. And what I mean by that is that they have control over the product and the process. So you're defining the end goal, right? You're defining what needs to be done, but not how it needs to be done. If you allow people to have that buy-in, to have that autonomy in their work schedule, in the way in which they go about doing it, again, it goes back to what I said before, how many people are managing and how many people are leading. A manager will say, well, I know the process. You might have to bleed a little. You might have to let them make their own way to make a productive employee, because you don't want to make an employee that relies on you for answers. You want them to be creative. You want them to take ownership of their process. Ultimately, you're focusing as a leader on results, right? And so as long as they get the results in the time they need to get them, let them manage the process. That's why you have them. If they need coaching to get there, if they need some advice and guidance, that's fine. I would also submit, though, as part of that process of getting somebody to be autonomous, make sure you're coaching and not mentoring. There's a difference. When I mentor someone, it's saying to them pretty much, here's what you should do. When I coach someone, most of what I do is say, why don't you think this worked? What could we do different? Let them think through the answers, right? So as much as possible, let your people buy into the process. They'll feel greater reward, greater intrinsic value, and greater control. Human beings want to be autonomous and want control over the process. They understand they have a boss, they understand good leadership, and they want to be led, but they don't want to be micromanaged. It's a huge difference. The second thing I would advise you to do, and again, there are so many, is allow failure. So many places are so afraid to fail. But by allowing failure, you allow growth. And you also allow creativity. If people are so afraid to fail, they won't do something new, they won't do something different. Could you imagine if a Google or a Facebook said to their developers, their engineers, fail and you're out. These guys would stick to the safest code, no risks. In fact, in the pharmaceutical industry, they actually will reward scientists who realize they're on a bad path. They realize, you know what, I tried this, it didn't work, I gotta jump ship. Because if they're so afraid to fail, what will they do? They'll spend countless hours trying to make it work, which even though in their mind they know probably won't, but they're so afraid of what the repercussions are that then they're gonna get punished. So now your company's spending a lot of money. And if you look, some of the greatest inventions came from failure, right? Look at Post-its, you know, that's one of them. That's an invention that came from failure. So you have to create an environment where it's okay to be creative, have ingenuity, but also fail. Fail and grow. Not fail for failure's sake, but fail forward, fail and grow. That's the two things I would probably advise most, but there are, like I said, there are so many, how to incentivize people and you know, again, how to enrich the environment and the culture.
And where can employers and leaders go to understand this more in detail?
So I would say, you know, look, there are a lot of great books out there, and I'll take an opportunity to promote myself here.
Please do.
You know, as you know, I do these quarterly, and they're 15 minutes in length. But at the end of each quarter, like this quarter's theme is employee engagement. At the end of this quarter, though, I'll offer very cost-effective 2-hour to 3-hour workshop on the topic. So you can find the training, you can find the advice. As a business executive, as a leader, you can get executive level coaching. There's a lot of ways to do it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. The information's out there. But even if that budget's low, if you're worried about additional training, additional time to take training, there are plenty of books out there on the subject.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.